Good morning from Riverton. In just a few minutes, hopefully, if this works, um, we'll be joining today's Federal Communications Commission live meeting, the monthly open meeting for April 23rd. And first of all, I want to say that the item for LPFM, MB docket 19193, has been dropped from the agenda. The reason was because I received word late yesterday evening, about 7 o'clock or so, that the commission had voted on that item as well as two other items prior to today's meeting. And we saw this happen last month with all the items on the agenda and all the items that, because of COVID-19, the fact that the meetings are now virtual, they're not actually happening at FCC headquarters right now, but everybody is meeting virtually, and it's more like a teleconference than anything. So we did not carry last month's meeting live because, well, there was really nothing to discuss on it. This month, the items that are still left on the agenda, I believe, are mainly related to 6 gigahertz items. Let's see, we've got here the 3 items on the agenda, or basically, okay, 6 gigahertz was one of the items. It was unlicensed use of the 6 gigahertz band. The commission will consider a report and order and further notice of proposed rulemaking that will promote innovation and the use of mid-band spectrum for broadband by allowing unlicensed operation in the 5.925 to 7.125 gigahertz band while protecting existing licensed operations. Second item is proposing the 5G fund for rural America. The commission will consider a notice of proposed rulemaking in order that would propose to establish a 5G fund for rural America, awarding up to $9 billion in support over 10 years for the deployment of 5G mobile broadband services in rural areas. And always an interesting topic at the FCC. Mitigation of orbital debris in the new space age. Yes, that is an item on today's agenda. The commission will consider a report and order and further notice of proposed rulemaking that would comprehensively update the commission's orbital debris rules for all commission authorized satellites. In other words, space junk. Isn't that why we have isn't that why we have isn't that why we now have the Space Force? I read up on this. Everybody is going after President Trump over the Space Force thing. But, actually, after I read a little bit about it, and, it's really just an offshoot of the Air Force, it doesn't seem to be such a bad thing. I mean, I am kind of a little bit of a space junkie, but, yeah. And space junk is no joke. Yeah, I agree because, yeah, I totally agree. And, it is a serious issue. I remember a long time ago there was was it a sitcom, or it was a sketch on a sketch comedy show where they talked about, the space junk cleanup people and such. So, yeah, space junk is definitely not a joke. It is a serious issue. And, yeah, 5G will give you the COVIDs. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, so that's kind of the situation that we're in here. Let's take a look here. The 3 items that are off the agenda include the Viasat market access request. The commission will consider an order and declaratory ruling that will grant Viasat request for U.S. market access to offer broadband services over using a proposed constellation of... Okay, we're on.
licensed services, especially in Wi-Fi. Now, we add the full 1200 megahertz of 6 gigahertz spectrum for low-power indoor devices that will be available and able to increase speed and capacity, relieve congestion, decrease latency, and bring about the next generation of unlicensed innovation, including Wi-Fi 6 and 6E in the near term. We also take the critical approach of authorizing standard power on licensed services with higher power limits than LPI using an automated frequency coordination system, which the Commission helped pioneer and with which it is very familiar. Well, some argue that the unlicensed community does not need the full 1200 megahertz of spectrum. I strongly disagree. Instead of doling out unlicensed spectrum in slivers or piecemeal through some dividend mechanism, we have the chance to provide a huge, much-needed infusion of wireless currency to American innovators and entrepreneurs who will undoubtedly amaze us with their ingenuity. Moreover, to obtain unlicensed 5G-like capabilities, 160 megahertz channels or eventually 320 megahertz under Wi-Fi 7 are absolutely necessary. And this allocation for unlicensed services will accelerate rather than compete with the American effort to deploy nationwide 5G advanced wireless services. Today's action is also very timely, as the COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated the importance of our Wi-Fi systems in keeping those in isolation connected to the outside world. Not to mention, the benefits well extend beyond these current circumstances. It is expected that unlicensed use will continue to experience tremendous growth in the coming years, which could lead to devastating congestion in our existing networks if not for this additional spectrum. This allocation will also facilitate other exceedingly important developments, providing affordable spectrum to expand broadband networks to the unserved and most remote parts of the nation, expanding the Internet of Things and increasing the availability of industrial applications. All of these enormous benefits can only be realized by authorizing both standard power operations and LPI devices, which, unlike the high power systems, do not need an AFC. Well, there's been much debate about whether an LPI can cause interference to fixed networks, electronic news gathering, and other incumbent uses. The studies in the record and the analysis of the talented professionals in the Office of Engineering and Technology are quite clear. Unlicensed use, with the technical rules set out in this item, can be introduced without causing harmful interference. In fact, today's item takes a very conservative approach and relegates some technical issues to the further notice section. I am very supportive of the increasing the power spectral density of LPI devices from 5 to 8 dBm per megahertz and introducing new very low power devices in the band with the appropriate technical parameters. Well, I was very hopeful that we would adopt these measures in today's order. I understand that our engineers would like to develop a more robust record on these issues. I firmly believe that increasing LPI power and VLP can be done while protecting incumbent users, and I assert that there are few greater priorities for the Commission than completing the further order this year. I also appreciate that my suggested edits were accepted by my colleagues. These include setting the allowable client device power by rule instead of basing it on the actual transmissional power of an access point at any given point in time, seeking comment in the further notice on the portable use of standard power devices, and making the VLP section neutral so it does not steer commenters to certain conclusions. Further, I am pleased at my request the item provides more structure and direction to the new multi-stakeholder group and seeks comment on the possible use of higher power limits for fixed point-to-point applications and directional antennas for standard power access points, among others. Now that this item is to be adopted and the bulk of the work on the C-band proceedings is over, it is time to refocus our attention on 5.9 gigahertz band for unlicensed, the 3.1 to 3.55 gigahertz band for exclusive license use, and other bands that will be needed for commercial wireless use in the future. Broadly, our action here should allow the Commission to triple our efforts to identify and reallocate bands for new licensed services, and I will continue to push this Commission to do the hard work to find the next 5G bands. Let's roll up our sleeves and refill that pipeline. I thank the Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Reilly. We'll now turn to Commissioner Carr.
Thanks. The stories you'll soon read about this vote will speak volumes about its significance. You'll read about the FCC supercharging Wi-Fi, and you'll read about the big boost we're giving to applications so many Americans rely on today. from our connected TVs to the devices we use to stream content or complete those online video calls we're now all too familiar with. All of those takes will be right. And yet, when we look back at this decision years from now, I have a feeling that none of those applications will be the ones we talk about when we discuss the innovations powered by these 1,200 megahertz of spectrum. Now, part of this stems from a very human limitation on our thinking. We tend to underestimate the pace and nature of technological change. We assume that the next big thing will just be a faster version of what we have today. Our brains can understand faster Wi-Fi, but struggle with the more visionary applications that are right around the corner. This isn't a new phenomena. Henry Ford reportedly said that if he'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. We even called the first cars horseless carriages. And to belabor the analogy, what we're voting on today isn't higher quality hay for the horses, it's high octane stuff. And that's why studies show that our decision will add nearly $200 billion to the economy when added with other unlicensed bands. So I suspect this order will not be remembered because it enabled faster Netflix downloads. We don't know what the future holds, but maybe the present pandemic gives us some clues about what's around the corner. Millions of kids, including mine, are out of school today and stuck at home. Teachers and parents are working hard to keep them learning. Some are turning to video calls to enhance their in-home education. But even that doesn't capture the feedback between student and teacher that exists in the classroom. Educators we've spoken with say it's particularly difficult to teach hands-on subjects like science. Today's decision can help change that by unleashing a new wave of virtual reality applications. Imagine the immersive learning experience students could enjoy in a virtual 3D environment. Well, Facebook's Oculus currently has a VR solution used to teach medical students. And just months ago, it launched a VR pilot project at a Seattle area high school. Or take grocery shopping. With the pandemic, many Americans are now standing in lines that snake around for blocks while maintaining 6 feet of separation. Instead of all that, imagine putting on VR glasses while sitting on your couch at home, walking virtually down the aisle at your local store, and quickly looking at, picking up, and choosing items. Instant checkout, immediate delivery, no contact. This type of transformative VR can solve pain points in our daily lives. And getting to that near future requires a next-gen connection. Even with the world's strongest 5G network, engineers tell us that VR devices will be powered by the unlicensed spectrum bands we free up today. Enabling those new connections will help drive the entire 5G ecosystem forward. So I'm pleased to support today's order, and I want to thank the chairman and my colleagues for seeking further comment on greenlighting very low power operations at power levels that will work in the real world, because those may be the key links that unlock some of those immersive VR devices. Finally, I want to thank OET, the Wireless Bureau, and so many others at the Commission for their work on what is truly a historic item. It has my support.
Thank you, Commissioner Carr. We'll now turn to Commissioner Rosenworcel.
Thanks. Not long after the invention of the personal computer, experts predicted that jobs would eventually be liberated from the office and home would be the future of work. Well, it didn't quite happen that way, but sometimes a powerful force can strike and change everything. So consider ourselves struck. This virus has ushered in remote work at unprecedented scale. Not everyone, to be sure. Doctors and nurses are still working at hospitals, first responders are out in our communities, and so many other essential workers are helping keep our pantry stocked and packages delivered, and we salute them. But millions more of us are doing our part by staying at home. I know, I'm one of them. I also know there is a technology my household is relying on like never before. That's Wi-Fi. Because in this crisis, work, school, healthcare, and so much more have migrated online. And if we're lucky, we're using Wi-Fi to call, stream, and create at home as part of our broadband service. But remember that others are driving with devices to get online. In this pandemic, parking lot Wi-Fi has become a thing as people get in their cars to go find a signal in communities where internet access at home is scarce. That needs attention because it is a stark reminder that when it comes to digital equity, we have work to do. It also proves just how extensively we are relying on Wi-Fi right now. Then consider that even before we reach this juncture, the unlicensed airwaves that Wi-Fi depends on have been growing crowded. Already, the 2.4 and 5 gigahertz bands are used by billions of devices in the Internet of Things, and that number is only poised to grow. Then consider that when we head to our 5G future, we expect as much as 70% of traffic to be offloaded to unlicensed airwaves. And take note that with fiber, cable, and commercial wireless all moving to gigabit speeds, existing Wi-Fi risks being the bottleneck for faster speeds at home. Without making more and more wide channels available, our online experiences are going to feel a lot like getting off a superhighway and onto a gravel road. We need to act. We need more unlicensed spectrum to carry all of the wireless activity that's coming our way. So when the FCC decided to explore the expansion of Wi-Fi in the 6 gigahertz band, I called for the agency to make available 1,200 megahertz of new spectrum to support next generation Wi-Fi, 160 megahertz wide channels that can offer gigabit speeds. And today we do just that. As a result, this effort has my support. I also appreciate that my colleagues have agreed to changes at my request, including clarifying power levels for client devices and seeking comment on opportunities for portable devices and the right power levels for very low power devices. In addition, I want to thank Commissioner O'Reilly for his early work to champion these policies and his willingness to do so with my office. Finally, I want to recognize that today's decision with our action today, we make progress on the need to identify additional bans for unlicensed use under the Ray-Bounds Act. So with this decision on unlicensed spectrum, we do well by the law, we add more permissionless wireless airwaves to the economy, and we expand the democratizing force of having more Wi-Fi in more places. Amen. Those are good things to do in this crisis and for the days ahead.
Thank you, Commissioner Rosenworcel. Commissioner Starks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The COVID-19 pandemic may be the most challenging event of our generation. While healthcare workers and first responders help those suffering from the coronavirus, grocery store and essential retail workers, bus drivers, transportation and delivery personnel all continue to perform their hard work so that we can get the goods and services that we need. And for those listening to this meeting online, social distancing may mean working from home, distance learning for kids, and video conferencing to stay in touch with colleagues and loved ones. But for millions of Americans without broadband connections, the response to COVID-19 has meant isolation. It has meant weeks, if not months, without instruction for their kids. And it has meant hard decisions about whether to tough out a troubling health issue or risk traveling to a doctor's office or an emergency room. This 6 gigahertz report and order, like the other items we discussed today, reflect an important aspect of the FCC's role in bridging the digital divide. For many people without broadband at home, getting online means relying on shared or public Wi-Fi connections in their neighborhood, the library, or even that local fast food place. And I particularly remember my visit to the Larkin Street Youth Services Center in San Francisco, where I heard from countless homeless teens about how they rely on the facility's Wi-Fi services in order to stay connected. Today's decision makes 1,200 megahertz in the 6 gigahertz band available for unlicensed use and holds special promise for all of these Americans, even for those who can't afford the new equipment that will take advantage of new spectrum and the latest iteration of Wi-Fi. The speeds for their devices should increase as existing Wi-Fi traffic moves to the new spectrum. Low-income consumers purchasing discounted broadband plans will realize the full benefits of their subscriptions as the Wi-Fi channels within their homes become less congested and data flows more freely. The new spectrum is also expected to spur new efforts by many broadband providers, retailers, restaurants, and others that offer public Wi-Fi access at hotspots across the nation. The benefits of this decision truly don't stop there. The 6 gigahertz spectrum is expected to complement 5G wireless service and unleash a wave of innovation for the Internet of Things. It will allow doctors to conduct complex examinations and procedures remotely, enable the training of students and workers using virtual and augmented reality, and spur the next generation of streaming content and gaming. Finally, I do look forward to a rapid resolution of the issues presented in the FNPRM. In particular, I hope that we can quickly determine whether and how to increase the power levels for low-power indoor operations. Higher power levels will ensure that people can connect to Wi-Fi throughout their homes without additional equipment that could be too costly or complicated for some Americans. Thank you to the Commission staff for their hard work in resolving this complicated engineering issues here, as always.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Starks. For my part, I as well will have a longer statement, but for now, I will note, as my colleagues have, that the coronavirus pandemic has changed nearly every aspect of our lives. For many of us, Wi-Fi has been a critical part of our new reality. It's helped us keep connected to our families and friends, as well as the outside world. It's enabled children to take part in distance learning. It's allowed Americans with medical issues to have virtual doctor's appointments. And for some unspecified others, perhaps, though I'm not confirming me, it has enabled people to stream Tiger King on Netflix. And Wi-Fi will be even more important in the years to come. By one estimate, the economic value created by Wi-Fi in the United States is projected to double by 2023, reaching nearly $1 trillion. Now, the good news is that the next generation of Wi-Fi has already started rolling out. Wi-Fi 6 will be over 2.5 times faster than the current standard, and it will offer better performance for connected devices. But in order to fully take advantage of the benefits of Wi-Fi 6, we need to make more mid-band spectrum available for unlicensed use. And so today, we take a bold step to increase the supply of unlicensed spectrum. We're making the entire 6 gigahertz band, a massive 1,200 megahertz test bed for innovators and innovation, available for unlicensed use. By doing this, we are effectively increasing the amount of mid-band spectrum available for Wi-Fi by almost a factor of 5. This will be a huge benefit to consumers and innovators across the nation. Ultimately, I expect that 6 gigahertz unlicensed devices will become a part of consumers' everyday lives, and I predict the rules we adopt today will play a major role in the growth of the Internet of Things, connecting appliances and other consumer electronics, as well as industrial sensors for manufacturing, among many other applications and services we can't even conceive today. At the same time, our approach will ensure that incumbents in the 6 gigahertz band are protected from harmful interference. Now, in addition to the report and order, today's further notice of proposed rulemaking explores possibilities for very low power devices in the 6 gigahertz band. We look forward to compiling a strong record and acting quickly to make 6 gigahertz available for these very low-power uses. I want to thank, as my colleagues have, all of our hardworking FCC staff. This is one of the most complicated proceedings from an engineering perspective that the Commission has encountered in many years, and we would not have reached this point were not for the efforts of the folks in the Office of Engineering and Technology, the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, and others throughout the agency. Terrific work on this item, and it has my full-throated support. With that, we will proceed to a vote on the item. Commissioner O'Reilly?
Votes aye.
Commissioner Carr?
Approve.
Commissioner Rosenworcel?
Approve.
Commissioner Starks?
Approve.
The chair votes to approve as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges granted as requested. Thank you again, team, for the great work on this item. Madam Secretary, could you please announce the next item on today's agenda?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the next item will be presented by the Rural Broadband Auctions Task Force and Wireline Competition Bureau and is entitled Establishing a 5G Fund for Rural America. Michael Jansen, Director of the Rural Broadband Auctions Task Force, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Mr. Jansen. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners and Madam Secretary. The Rural Broadband Auctions Task Force and the Wireline Competition Bureau present for your consideration a notice of proposed rulemaking and order that, if adopted, will support the build-out of 5G mobile broadband networks in areas that likely would otherwise go unserved, so that Americans in rural communities gain access to communications options on par with those offered in urban areas. I would like to thank the staff of the Auctions Division in the Office of Economics and Analytics for their assistance with drafting this item. Valerie Barish will now present the item.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. This notice of proposed rulemaking, if adopted, will propose and seek comment on establishing the 5G Fund for Rural America as a replacement for Mobility Fund Phase 2 to retarget universal service funds to support deployment of mobile 5G service in rural areas. The notice will propose and seek comment on a budget of up to $9 billion to be awarded in 2 phases using multi-round descending clock reverse auctions with a 10-year term of support. Phase 1 would award up to $8 billion to areas unlikely to see deployment of 5G service, absent support, or as part of T-Mobile's transaction-related rural deployment commitments, with $680 million of that budget reserved for service to tribal lands. Phase 2 would award at least $1 billion for harder to serve and higher cost areas, such as farms and ranches, specifically targeting deployments that facilitate precision agriculture. The notice will also seek comment on 2 options for identifying areas eligible for support. Under option A, eligible areas would be identified based primarily on the degree of rurality of each area, with support prioritized to areas that have historically lacked 3G and 4G LTE services. Under this option, the notice estimates that the Commission could award funding through an auction in 2021. Under option B, eligible areas would be identified based upon improved mobile broadband deployment maps developed using coverage data collected through the new Digital Opportunity Data Collection. Under this option, the notice estimates that the Commission could award funding through an auction in 2023 or later. Further, the notice will propose using census tracts as the minimum geographic area for bidding, using an adjustment factor that considers the relative cost of serving different areas to distribute support, public interest obligations, performance requirements, reporting and non-compliance measures for both legacy high-cost support and 5G fund support recipients, and eligibility and application requirements for 5G fund auction participants and winning bidders. The companion order, if adopted, will, among other things, direct the Office of Economics and Analytics and the Wireline Competition Bureau to propose and seek comment on methodologies and values for an adjustment factor. The Rural Broadband Auctions Task Force and the Wireline Competition Bureau recommend adoption of this notice of proposed rulemaking and order and request editorial privileges extending only to technical and conforming edits. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barish and Mr. Jansen, for the presentation. We'll now turn to comments from the bench, beginning with Commissioner O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This item seeks to forge a path forward for the long-standing mess that was the Mobility Fund Phase 2 proceeding, proposing to fund the deployment of 5G service to unserved rural Americans while seeking comment on 2 separate and alternative approaches. The item is very well intended, and I applaud steps to reform our current mobility legacy high-cost support program. It should go without saying that as a huge proponent of 5G and the benefits it will bring to the Americans and our economy. I appreciate the Commission's focus on ways to facilitate this deployment nationwide, especially in the harder to reach parts of America. Nonetheless, I do have certain questions and concerns with respect to some of the proposals and conclusions of the item, and will have to be worked out before the proceeding ever goes to final order. Overall, it's certainly worthy of our support at the NPRM stage, and I approve its adoption today. And I'll insert a longer statement for the record, and I thank the chair.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Reilly. Commissioner Carr.
Thank you. In 2015 and 2016, the U.S. was at serious risk of ceding global leadership in 5G to China and to our other global competitors. Back then, it took too long and cost too much to build internet infrastructure in this country. Since then, we have executed on a concrete plan to turn things around. And that plan is now delivering results. Internet speeds are up about 85% since year-end 2016. More miles of high-speed fiber were built out last year, connecting our homes and cell sites than ever before. In small cells, the building blocks for 5G have been installed at a record-setting clip. The U.S. now has the strongest 5G platform in the world. That network will help power our economy out of this COVID-19 downturn and support America's next great comeback. In all of this, regulations matter. Under our 5G plan, we cut red tape that only drove up costs and held back internet bills. We freed up more spectrum than any other country in the world, including taking on those thorny spectrum bands that past commissions opted just not to deal with. And those decisions are why 5G is live today, not just in New York and San Francisco, but in places like Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and Peachtree Corners, Georgia. With all that progress, there's still a lot of work ahead. We want every community in the country to have a fair shot at next-gen connectivity. And there are many Americans in rural areas where there's no business case for building 5G networks. To close that gap, we're now proposing the largest effort ever to support high-speed mobile networks in communities across the country. I'm pleased that we seek comment today on ways we can move forward quickly, including whether we should use the best available data now or wait until improved mapping information is available. And I'm glad that we're targeting at least $1 billion for the support of precision agriculture applications. I've seen firsthand from Indiana to Nebraska to South Dakota that America's farmers and ranchers are leveraging cutting-edge technologies, from drones to connected combines, in their effort to feed the world. I'm glad that they will have our support. I want to thank the staff of the Rural Broadband Auctions Task Force, the Wireline Competition Bureau, the Wireless Bureau, and the Office of Economics and Analytics for their really hard work on this item. It has my support.
Thank you, Commissioner Carter. Commissioner Rosenworcel.
It was a year and a half ago that Corey Chase took to the roads of Vermont. He crisscrossed the state, driving on everything from the biggest highways to the smallest stretches of dirt and gravel. And he didn't log 6,000 miles in a car to take in the fall leaves. He was doing his job. That's because Corey Chase is a Vermont employee, and he was charged with testing the availability of wireless service in every corner of the Green Mountain State. To do this, he took more than 180,000 speed tests using 6 different devices with 6 different service plans and too many tanks of gas to count. And he set out on this quest because the state believed that the wireless maps at the Federal Communications Commission, or what was then called Mobility Fund 2, suggested there was a whole lot more service in the state than its residents recognized. So the agency told stakeholders to put in the work, do tests, and prove it. And a lot of them did, because Corey Chase was not alone. In fact, more than 20 million speed tests were submitted to the FCC in a nationwide effort to demonstrate serious flaws in the FCC's wireless maps. So this history matters because it wasn't that long ago. Now fast forward to the present. The FCC has scrapped the effort to have stakeholders improve our wireless maps. It passed on the work of Corey Chase and so many others. Instead of using their work to fix our maps and get a clear picture of where deployment is and is not, the agency threw up its hands and canceled the whole Mobility Fund 2 effort. And in its place, we have what we introduced today, the new 5G fund. It sounds good, because we still have places in this country where signals are scarce and wireless service is hard to find. But this do-over has serious flaws. We're not just ignoring all the problems with mapping that came before, we're at risk at making the same mistakes again. Here's why. First, this 5G rulemaking presents a false choice. It suggests we can either provide funds for more wireless service fast, or we can do it accurately. That's crazy. We need to do both. If we're going to spend billions in public funds on improving wireless service in rural America, it's not too much to ask that we do it with speed and get it right. Under what my colleagues call Option A, the FCC would commit $8 billion over the next 10 years without any new maps. This would lock up the bulk of our universal service funds for improving wireless service for a decade without an honest accounting of where service is and is not. This is a mistake. Under Option B, the FCC says it will roll up its sleeves and do the work to make improvements to our maps and then distribute funds accordingly. But it says it can't possibly do this for at least 3 years. This too is a mistake. In fact, the entire framing here is wrong. We can do two things at once. We can work fast and base our efforts on facts. Second, we need maps before money and data before deployment, because that is just what Congress told us to do in the Broadband Data Act, which was signed into law last month. It set forth very specific requirements designed to improve the FCC's broadband maps for wired and wireless service. And this data was supposed to inform the agency's distribution of universal service to expand the reach of service in rural America. You know, I'm not the only one who thinks so. Just this week, Senators Manchin, Lankford, Tester, and Hyde-Smith wrote us with a simple plea that we do this in the right order because we, quote, can never deliver on the promise of universal service without accurate broadband coverage maps, unquote. They're right. Third and finally, today's effort fails to properly examine the lessons learned from Mobility Fund 2. In fact, the FCC terminates the Mobility Fund 2 docket. Why? What are we hiding? For the record, some of our past mistakes in that docket include having carriers file maps that bore too little relation to reality. They include running a costly challenge process that required Corey Chase to drive thousands of miles on Vermont roads. They include failing to hold anyone accountable after our staff found that some of our largest carriers filed inaccurate mapping data with this agency. It seems that by doubling the money and wiping the slate clean, the FCC hopes that no one will notice. That's not right. Starting over may be a necessary course, but we should find a better way forward. We can learn from what came before. We can do the work required in the Broadband Data Act to identify where funds should go, and we can do this with both speed and accuracy. Because if we do, we can honestly and accurately support the expansion of wireless service in rural communities nationwide, and that, after all, should be our goal. So while I approve the idea behind this fund, I dissent in all other respects.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Starks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Access to broadband helps rural areas tap into economic and educational opportunities that may not be close to home, which encourages young people to stay and attracts new residents and employers. To promote these economic and social benefits, I strongly support the notice of proposed rulemaking's goal of bringing state-of-the-art wireless service to all Americans, especially those in rural communities. I look forward to a robust public feedback on the many important questions raised in the NPRM. I cannot, however, endorse the false choice between speed and accuracy that it sets forth. Because I believe we can and should target this funding using the new coverage maps Congress has ordered us to develop, I must dissent in part. Option A would distribute funding based on degrees of rurality without finishing the corrected maps required by the Broadband Data Act. Making funding decisions, particularly for such a long period, without accurate deployment data is, I believe, bad policy for all the reasons I outlined with respect to the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund. In this case, it also creates a raft of practical problems. The NPRM proposes, for example, to prioritize areas historically lacking mobile service. But how will we do that? The only option the NPRM considers is using the Form 477 data that, as the NPRM also acknowledges, does, quote, not really reflect actual on-the-ground coverage in many instances, close quote. Relying again on bad coverage data would be an insult to the many state and local governments, organizations, and individuals who invested time and money in the failed Mobility Fund Phase 2 challenge process. It would also knowingly avoid Congress's directive that we make funding decisions based on better data by stalling the critical effort to fix our maps. The NPRM asserts that Option A complies with the Broadband Data Act because the Commission does not have to base funding decisions on new maps until there are new maps. And even if that satisfies the letter of the law, Option A boldly ignores the spirit of the Broadband Data Act. It looks to me like the Commission is sidestepping the statute by deprioritizing and dragging out the mapping process. When it comes to maps, we are only waiting on ourselves. The Broadband Data Act requires the Commission to adopt final new mapping rules by September 2020 at the latest. The premise of option A is that we cannot expect those new maps to be completed until even a year after that. And if that is true, I think it's because the Commission has not fully prioritized this work. The chairman announced the creation of the 5G Fund on December 4th, 2019, nearly 5 months ago. Imagine how much closer to a well-targeted 5G fund we would be if we had committed the necessary resources on that very day to producing and finalizing accurate maps, full speed ahead. If you need a longer time horizon, consider where we would be if we had fully committed to that effort in December 2018 when the chairman announced the investigation into carriers that had submitted inaccurate coverage data. The point, we could have chosen to prioritize, invest the Commission's resources in getting the mapping project moving. We could have done this a better way. Instead, I believe we've proposed another 10-year, multi-billion-dollar commitment that, when combined with RDOF, could mean that the vast majority of our high-cost support is spent chasing bad data for yet another decade. For these reasons, I believe option A should not even be under consideration, and I cannot agree.
Thanks, Commissioner. In many rural areas, you quickly notice how dependent you have become on mobile broadband. That mobile connection is a powerful tool for connecting Americans with family, jobs, doctors, and teachers wherever they go, and it's lacking in many rural areas. As the rollout of 5G happens in the United States, we must ensure that rural Americans are not left behind. More than 200 million, mostly urban and suburban Americans have access to 5G mobile broadband. We've taken decisive action to bring 5G to rural America, like conditioning our approval of the T-Mobile Sprint merger on the company's enforceable commitment to deploy 5G to 90% of rural Americans within 6 years. But without further action, Americans living in the most remote and sparsely populated areas could be left behind. That's not acceptable to me. And that's why I announced my plan for a $9 billion 5G fund for rural America last December. Now, some question why we should spend money to deploy 5G to rural America when some parts of our country still lack 3G or 4G. But it doesn't make any sense at the dawn of the 5G era to spend our universal service funds to deliver networks using predecessor technologies that will be outdated by the time they're operational. We cannot and we will not condemn rural wireless consumers to a continual game of catch-up. This notice tees up two different approaches for comment. One option would aggressively target those rural areas that are least likely to see 5G coverage absent support by using current data to identify particularly rural areas and to prioritize those that historically lacked 4G LTE or even 3G service. The other option would delay any 5G support until the new, granular, precise broadband coverage maps that the FCC is developing in its digital opportunity data collection are complete. There are advantages and disadvantages to each approach. It's often said that governing is about making choices, and that's the case here. We will have to decide whether enhanced precision justifies a significant delay, as much as 2 additional years. And I look forward to having that conversation with my fellow commissioners and other stakeholders. What we cannot do is pretend that there is no trade-off between precision and speed, that we can magically fiat both perfect knowledge and immediate distribution of funds. We can't have our cake and eat it too. Today's notice also seeks comment on several other important proposals, too numerous to mention here, and I look forward to seeing how this record develops. In the meantime, I appreciate the great work of our team on the Rural Broadband Auctions Task Force and elsewhere in the Commission, as well as the broad support this initiative has gotten from those who represent rural America, such as the Rural Ag Council, the National Grange, the U.S. Cattlemen's Association, American Agri-Women, Land O'Lakes, and many others. I appreciate your support and look forward to delivering on the opportunity that 5G presents for rural America in the days to come. With that, we will proceed to a vote on the item. Commissioner O'Reilly?
Aye.
Commissioner Carr?
Approve.
Commissioner Rosenworcel?
Approve in part, dissent in part.
Commissioner Starks?
Approve in part, dissent in part.
The chair votes to approve. The item is adopted with editorial privileges granted as requested. Madam Secretary, could you please take us to item number 3 on today's agenda?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the third item on your agenda will be presented by the International Bureau and is entitled Mitigation of Orbital Debris in the New Space Age. Tom Sullivan, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. The International Bureau is pleased to present for your consideration this draft report and order and further notice of proposed rulemaking addressing mitigation of orbital debris. I would like to thank the International Bureau Orbital Debris Team, especially Carl Kensinger, our colleagues in the Office of Economics and Analytics, the Office of Engineering and Technology, the Office of General Counsel, the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, and our space-related agency partners for their contributions to this proceeding. I would like to introduce Marissa Velez, an attorney advisor in the Satellite Division, who will present the item.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. This report and order and further notice of proposed rulemaking addresses the Commission's rules governing the mitigation of orbital debris. This action represents the first comprehensive look at the Commission's orbital debris rules since their adoption in 2004. These updates reflect the experience and practices developed in the Commission's satellite licensing processes since 2004, would help to ensure that the Commission's rules remain up to date in addressing technical and market changes that impact orbital debris mitigation, and would incorporate important improvements in mitigation practices and guidance into the Commission's rules. The order would add numerical values into the Commission's application disclosure rules on collision risk, probability of successful post-mission disposal, and casualty risk. The order would also adopt new disclosure requirements on topics such as how satellites will protect inhabitable spacecraft and satellite trackability and identification, among other things. Additionally, the new rules would update the process for geostationary orbit satellite license extension. The further notice of proposed rulemaking would seek additional comment on several matters associated with larger systems of non-geostationary satellites, including assessing collision risk and casualty risk on a system-wide basis. The further notice would also seek comment on a maneuverability requirement for satellites operating above a certain altitude in low Earth orbit. Additionally, the further notice would seek input on an indemnification requirement, as well as on a bond that would be tied to successful post-mission disposal. The International Bureau recommends adoption of this report and order and further notice of proposed rulemaking and requests editorial privileges for technical and conforming edits. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan, for that introduction, and Ms. Velez for that compelling presentation. I will now turn to comments from the bench, beginning with Commissioner O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is clear that FCC orbital debris rules from 2004 are simply not adequate to protect space users from the potential threats presented by the collision of natural or human-created masses. Although technology has improved and new models are available to evaluate and mitigate space trash, a proliferation of man-made objects, literally projectiles of all sizes, continues hurtling through orbits used for satellites, spacecraft, and International Space Station. For those reasons, I support today's efforts to update our orbital debris rules. There has been much talk about what role, if any, the Commission has to play here. With this item, I'm pleased the Chairman ultimately agrees with my position that the FCC is neither prohibited from acting nor should it act unilaterally. Ultimately, the FCC provides licenses or grants market access for these satellite services, so we play a role in the good stewardship of space. We can't sit on the sidelines, argue we have no responsibility or authority over the issue, or pass the buck entirely to other agencies. On the other hand, it is also not appropriate for the Commission to single-handedly micromanage and attempt to regulate space as there's no other agencies with far more expertise in certain aspects of space travel and orbital debris than the FCC. Well, the draft circulated prior to today's meeting had serious sections that caused me some concern. I thank the Chairman and my colleagues for accepting my proposed edits. At my suggestion, we move some issues from the order to the further notice, including mitigating the collision and casualty risks and what maneuverability is appropriate for these large constellations. it was apparent that some of the metrics in the circulated item would have forced total redesigns of planned networks or doomed projects altogether. Two other things of note. Today's item imposes numerous disclosure obligations on topics such as trackability, deployment devices used, the release of persistent liquids, and post-mission disposal. While there is no direct harm in collecting information, it often leads to unnecessarily cost burdens for industry. We also need to figure out how case-by-case decisions made during the review of one entity's application, but which may serve as precedent for others, are made publicly available. Finally, the issue of whether satellite companies should be required to indemnify the U.S. for any harm from their satellite operations was appropriately moved to the further notice, joining the post-mission disposal bond proposal. Paying for long-term bonds and determining the uncertain liability of indemnification will greatly increase overall cost, affecting financing and severely disadvantage small businesses, entrepreneurs, and new entrants. If the U.S. wants to be a leader in the current space race, our regulatory processes cannot be more expensive and burdensome than those of other nations. This is not the last time the Commission will be looking into this matter, and I plan to follow these issues very closely. I thank the Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Reilly. Commissioner Rosenworcel.
Oh, I think you jumped the line.
You want to go to Commissioner Carr?
Commissioner Carr, you've been demoted, but I will rectify that now and turn to Commissioner Carr.
I'll take the demotion and the promotion back. Look, it's no secret that I've been skeptical of the FCC's jurisdiction and expertise when it comes to regulating orbital debris. Analyzing collision risk, spacecraft maneuverability, ionic sodium potassium droplets, tubular cylinder deployers, and separation rings, these are not within the Commission's core competencies, to say the least. Now, some may dismiss my concerns by saying that there are a lot of smart people at the FCC, and there certainly are, and that this stuff isn't rocket science. Except it is. It is literally rocket science we're wading into. Many stakeholders have now echoed those concerns over the past few weeks. And that's why I welcomed the chance to work with stakeholders and my colleagues on edits that have greatly improved the document we vote on today. I want to thank Commissioner Starks in particular for his willingness to collaborate on a series of really important changes to the document. The changes we propose together align this item much more closely with the positions held by expert agencies that have experience in aerospace engineering, like NASA, NOAA, and the FAA. As a result of our edits, the Commission now adopts our sister agencies' large object collision and casualty risk standards. We now seek further comment on spacecraft maneuverability and indemnification requirements, and we now take a more cautious and appropriately balanced approach to our bond proposal. With those substantial edits to the item, I can now support it. So I want to thank the International Bureau for all of its really hard work on this decision, and I want to express my appreciation again to Commissioner Starks for his leadership on these issues. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Carr. And now, Commissioner Rosenworcel.
All right. These days, it is hard to think about anything more than the here and now. But if the present crisis has taught us anything, it's that getting ahead of the problems is important. This is the best way to prepare for the future, and that future is full of challenges, some known, some unknown. Among the former is the explosion of activity in space, courtesy of so many new constellations and satellite systems. Preparing for this rush is important because the opportunities are big, but to realize them, we have to get the growing challenge of orbital debris under control. That's because so much has changed in the space world since the FCC last updated its orbital debris rules in 2004. Back then, there were about 800 satellites in operation and roughly 10,000 pieces of orbital debris larger than 10 centimeters. Today, there are more than 2,200 operational satellites, 22,300 pieces of orbital debris larger than 10 centimeters, and nearly 1 million pieces of debris larger than 1 centimeter. Plus, over the last year or so, this agency has approved more than 13,000 new satellites for launch. More are headed our way. So the potential for debris and collisions is multiplying fast. How do we plan for this future? Well, we act now to get ahead of it. And to this end, after more than a year of work, we now have an update to the United States government orbital debris mitigation standard practices, thanks to an interagency process led by NASA and required by Space Policy Directive 3. So now it falls to the FCC to update its own rules. And while we should strive to harmonize our policies with this earlier federal update, we also need to be honest and recognize its scope. That's because the issues raised by large constellations are far more urgent in commercial activity, where they are already being designed, built, and launched. Moreover, we need to recognize the FCC has unique authority. We are the only ones with jurisdiction over commercial space activities. That makes our work to update the agency's 2004 orbital debris policies really important. And after more than a year of review, our staff developed a range of good ideas. So there were a few issues like indemnification where we needed to ask deeper questions and learn more. And now we do just that thanks to the willingness of my colleagues to work together and improve what was initially proposed. But I concur today because while this is a start, there is so much more we need to do. To that end, we are passing on one of the most important opportunities we teed up in the rulemaking that kicked off this proceeding, tightening the 25-year rule that allows a satellite and debris from its launch to stay in orbit for 25 years after its mission ends. This rule simply does not make sense in today's orbital environment. According to a NASA study of large constellations, if we fail to start deorbiting satellites that have completed their missions within a more reasonable time frame, the likelihood of catastrophic collisions is going to grow. While I would have preferred that we address it here, I appreciate my colleagues are willing to continue this conversation and in further rulemaking. I also would have preferred the agency make more progress today on collision risks for large constellations, accidental explosion risk, and maneuverability issues. Going forward, we need to prepare for the future with more speed and urgency if we want the United States to retain our global authority in space matters, because we are not the only ones looking to the skies for innovation and economic growth. European leaders have already approved funding for the first active debris removal mission. Japan is funding an effort to develop commercial debris removal service too. I'm convinced we can play a leadership role, but to do so, more work on these issues is necessary.
Thanks, Commissioner. Commissioner Starks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. While much of the focus has been on the urban areas that have certainly paid the heaviest price during the COVID-19 pandemic, the coronavirus spares truly no community. In the last few weeks, we've heard about Sioux Falls, South Dakota, which now has by far the largest number of COVID-19 cases per capita of any Midwestern state. Other areas like Randolph County, Illinois, Osage County, Oklahoma, and Albany, Georgia are all experiencing surges of infections that could quickly challenge their resources. Broadband is a key weapon in the fight against this virus. With good broadband connection, people can limit the spread of the disease while remaining in touch with work, participating in distance learning, and receiving medical treatment where they can via telemedicine. Yet for many rural communities that are coping with the first wave of infections, COVID-19 has brought home the consequence of internet inequality. In Missouri, Marys County has not even attempted a remote learning program because 30% of its students lack broadband access. Following a wave of local hospital closures, small towns throughout the United States are struggling with how they will care with COVID-19 patients with no local doctors and no telemedicine capabilities. Communities like these may not be focused on what we do here today on orbital debris policy, but today's decision should help them by accelerating the growth of the latest generation of satellite broadband. This technology uses low Earth orbit satellites to provide internet connectivity with latency and speed superior to existing satellite broadband options and competitive with cable and fiber offerings. While traditional broadband providers start their networks from urban centers and expand outwards, satellite providers can provide service to everyone once their satellites are operational, regardless of where they live or the population density of that community. Next-gen satellite broadband technology holds tremendous promise for connecting people in the hardest-to-reach communities in America, and I'm excited that American companies like SpaceX and Amazon are leading this burgeoning industry. I deeply appreciate the collaboration that I had with Commissioner Carr on our shared concerns with the original draft of this decision, and that the chairman responded to those concerns. I strongly believe that we should pay close attention to NASA's expertise when it comes to setting specific standards in space policy. In particular, I'm glad that we revised language regarding two aspects of the draft rules that would have had significantly inhibited the growth of next-generation satellite broadband. The draft originally adopted a standard for collision risk that departed from NASA's recommendations to assess that risk on a per-satellite basis, and similarly, the draft adopted a casualty risk standard that differed from NASA's recommendations on those issues. And while we should do our utmost to reduce the risk of collisions and injury, I agree with NASA's expert judgment that the approach we adopt today preserves safety while we and our sister agencies study whether a different standard makes sense for these constellations. Space may seem like a long way away from the fight against COVID-19, but the rules we adopt here could have a profound impact on how rural America responds in future crises. I'm pleased we were able to spur American leadership in this promising industry while still promoting space safety. I do look forward to seeing the results. Thank you to IB for their hard work on this item.
Thank you, Commissioner. Today, our nation's commercial space sector is growing rapidly, and at the FCC, we have been working hard to help our industry seize the opportunities of the new space age. Under my leadership, the FCC has approved 14 applications and market access requests by 11 companies for non-geostationary satellite orbit constellation systems. Our action in this area fits well with the FCC's twin goals of closing the digital divide and promoting innovation. However, more satellites in space means a lot more traffic, especially in low Earth orbit. As we enter a new era in which tens of thousands of new satellites could be deployed, space debris is becoming a more serious concern. If you want a graphic illustration of the problem, just rewatch the movie Gravity. So, as the FCC facilitates the deployment of new satellite constellations, we also must address the problem of orbital debris. And address it we have. Today, for the first time in 15 years, we are adopting new rules to mitigate the threat posed by orbital debris, including regulations involving satellite design, better disposal procedures, and active collision avoidance. 15 years is an eternity in this fast-moving sector, and the time has come to address this critical issue. The rules that we adopt today take a balanced approach, mitigating the risk posed by orbital debris, while at the same time continuing to light a regulatory path for space-based innovations. Some of my colleagues asked that we move our consideration of certain issues from the report and order to the further notice so that we could seek additional comment on them, and I was happy to accommodate that request. But let me make clear that I plan on bringing these issues to closure once we have received additional feedback. Because while our action today is an important step toward addressing the threat posed by orbital debris, there is still more that needs to be done to protect the space environment. It is in everyone's interest to keep the final frontier safe for new and innovative uses. So I look forward to continuing the work with the private sector and other government agencies to implement common sense solutions to get this job done. I'd like to conclude by recognizing the FCC staff, and particularly the International Bureau, led by Chief Sullivan, for the ongoing efforts to mitigate space debris. I know firsthand what a complicated and painstaking process this was to bring this item to fruition, and I really appreciate the work you've done. With that, we'll proceed to a vote on the item. Commissioner O'Reilly?
Aye.
Commissioner Carr?
Approve.
Commissioner Rosenworcel?
Concur.
Commissioner Starks?
Approve.
The chair votes to approve as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges granted as requested. As folks know, this is typically the time, now that the agenda has concluded, that I ask my colleagues if they'd like to make any announcements. Since we don't have visual cues to rely on, I'll just go in order to see if any commissioner has announcements. Commissioner O'Reilly?
No, none.
Commissioner Carr?
No, other than echoing your thanks to the FCC staff who have just been doing a tremendous job over the past few weeks. I'm sure in difficult circumstances for themselves, juggling work, kids, caring for loved ones. So thank you very much to FCC staff.
Thank you. Commissioner Rosenworcel?
No additional announcements.
Commissioner Starks?
No particular announcements by me either.
Okay, thank you. Well, I do have a few announcements before we adjourn. First is a sad announcement of the passing of Ileana Alfaro. Ms. Alfaro had been a clerk in the audio division of the Media Bureau since August of 2008. Started in the division as an 11th grade student under the STEP program, which is sponsored by Northwestern High School in Adelphi, Maryland, and that gave her the chance to work while she was in high school. She later transferred into the Pathways internship program, which was designed to give students exposure to the federal workforce through paid employment. Her appointment under the Pathways program expired in August of 2016, and she was so eager to be a permanent employee, and we were so eager to have her that we did that and promoted her to the position of communications analyst. By all accounts, she was always an outstanding employee in the audio division, did her job in a very professional manner and with a smile on her face. Always a pleasure to be around. Unfortunately, that same year she became converted to a permanent employee. She also began treatment for a metastatic breast cancer. She lived very courageously with her diagnosis until the end, and she unfortunately succumbed to that illness on Monday, April 13th. She will greatly be missed by the FCC family, and our thoughts are with her family, her husband, David Camarana, and her kids during this difficult time. Next announcement is to congratulate Pam Yingling today. She retired last Friday from the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau's licensing branch in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Pam started with the commission in 1974, and then she left the FCC for about 5 years to raise a family, and then she came back for quite the encore. She finished her career with 40 years of public service at the commission, all of it in Gettysburg. She progressed in her career until she became the lead industry analyst reviewing complex applications filed for public safety land mobile systems, which is the position that she held until her retirement. Ms. Yingling, we really thank you from afar for all that you've done for the commission and wish you a well-deserved and relaxing retirement. Aside from internal announcements, I also have one external announcement that I'm very excited to make. As folks know, the FCC has stood up in very short order and in very productive fashion the COVID-19 telehealth program, a $200 million program that implements authority and funding recently granted from Congress in the CARES Act. We have already distributed funding to 2 batches of applicants, and I'm pleased to announce today that we have a list of 6 applications that will be approved and will be released in batch 3. And those 6 applicants in alphabetical order are, number 1, the Anne Arundel Medical Center in Annapolis, Maryland. It was awarded $361,006 to implement video telehealth services to diagnose and treat COVID-19 patients across 11 medically underserved areas throughout central Maryland, and to support remote patient visits and monitoring to protect high-risk patients that have to be triaged out of the hospital or as part of an early discharge program for non-COVID patients to preserve hospital capacity. Next, number 2, is Christiana Care Health Services in Newark, Delaware. They were awarded $714,322 to provide and expand its telehealth and remote patient monitoring services to low-income, vulnerable patients, primarily in Newcastle County. And I'll add parenthetically, I visited Christiana Care during a visit to Delaware last year and was very impressed by their commitment to telehealth and look forward to seeing what this funding will enable. Number 3 is Garfield Health Center in Monterey Park, California, which was awarded $130,217 to provide remote care to low-income, vulnerable patients with underlying and or chronic health conditions that are at high risk for COVID-19, while triaging positive COVID-19 patients in the San Gabriel Valley. Number 4 is the HIV/AIDS Alliance for Region 2, which does business as Open Healthcare Clinic in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The HIV/AIDS Alliance was awarded $116,049 to expand its telehealth and remote patient monitoring capabilities to treat low-income, vulnerable patients with and without COVID-19. Number 5 is the NYU Grossman School of Medicine in New York, New York, which was awarded $772,687 to expand telehealth services that allow high-risk, elderly, and vulnerable patients to stay at home while receiving complex care and chronic disease management. Last but not least, number 6 is the White Plains Hospital Medical Center in White Plains, New York, which has been awarded $165,832 to deploy telehealth services to treat high-risk and vulnerable patients with pre-existing pulmonary conditions and to implement telehealth services to address that facility's surging patient population while minimizing the risk of COVID-19 exposure for staff and patients without COVID-19. Congratulations to each of these awardees, and a heartfelt thank you to the incredible staff of the Wireline Competition Bureau, led by Chris Monteith and Trent Harkrader. They've gotten a huge number of applications, spending a ton of hours going through those applications and approving these excellent ones, many more to come. But we really thank you. I'm a firm believer, as I know my colleagues are, in the power of telehealth and telemedicine to deliver better health outcomes and access across this country. And perhaps during the most trying public health emergency the country has had in 100 years, you've really stepped up to the plate to help Americans become healthier. So thank you, Chris, Trent, and everybody in that bureau who's working on this issue for all you've done. If my colleagues don't have any further announcements, Madam Secretary, I would turn to you to announce the date of the next FCC agenda meeting.
The next agenda meeting of the Federal Communications Commission is Wednesday, May 13th, 2020.
Until then, we stand adjourned. Be safe, everybody.
Gavel and all. All right, greetings from Riverton. And we're hoping to get some information here, and I'm hoping we'll get some information, and while we're on this live stream, some more information in respect to the decision that was made on MB docket 19193. And what's going on with that? What happened was that I did get notified yesterday about 7 o'clock hour Eastern time yesterday that the commission had voted on MB docket 19193, and they voted to adopt. The only thing that was mentioned in this little informal notice that I got from one of my staff birdies, I guess you could call them, was that they made some kind of a change on the directional antenna issue that we were talking about. We were talking, there was this discussion in regards to whether LPFM stations should have to do a proof of performance and a surveyor verification on directional antennas for LPFM stations. And I've been fighting this tooth and nail because of the expenses that were involved. This occupied the same time that I had put aside for LP250 to try to save LP250 during this proceeding. And from my understanding, there is some changes. I think they're related to the issue with Mexico. What we had done in the last week was, I did a bunch of ex parte presentations, calls to FCC staff to discuss on the record the issues of the docket, and we talked about the directional antenna issue, and when the FCC came out with this draft report and order, they rejected LP250, which at the time had a contour element to it. It had what we called the backstop, and the idea was that if you upgraded to 250, you would have to still use a contour to protect another full service station. So the idea was we were addressing EMF's issues with Razorcake and dealing with the so-called foothill effect. And so the FCC threw that idea away. And of course we went back to the FCC in ex parte and said, okay, you don't want the complicated contour study in LP250, fine. We'll increase the distance requirements and we'll go in with something that looks like LP 100 but at LP 250. So, you know, the directional antenna was part of that. Directional antennas was also part of the request for LPFM to use contours instead of distance separation to protect FM translators. And that was flat out rejected because of the, quote, complexity. You know, while I do not agree with the commission that LPFM needs to be this dumbed down, watered down service, you know, they continue to insist that they don't want to deal with these complexities. Bottom line is they don't want to deal with the NAB. The NAB kind of got the last word in right before the sunshine period, right before the FCC had to, you know, before we all have to cut off. You know, the FCC does not allow any on-the-record discussions of any dockets within 7 days of a commission meeting. That's the Sunshine Act. And so we don't know yet what is in here. I am waiting for the FCC to release the information, but what I am suspecting is that the FCC has given us relief on the issue of relief on the issue in regards to the Mexico protection. And, you know, the point that I raised there was that unlike, you know, protecting other facilities, the use of directional antennas in the case of the Mexico strip zone is to comply with an international agreement. And I think we got relief for the 120 stations or so along the border strip zone that will be wanting to, you know, if any of them want to upgrade to LP 250, I'm sorry, to LP 100, to a full 100 watt facility, that they'll be able to. Again, I have not seen a report and order yet document. So we're going to do is we're going to sit here and wait for a little bit here to see if the FCC is releasing it. The Secretary's office right now is slowly releasing documents into the system right now. But for right now, let's talk about an item that's on the agenda for the May FCC meeting. And that's in regards to broadcast public notice. Under the broadcast public notice, right now, the Communications Act does have a provision that requires all broadcast stations that are filing certain types of applications to give public notice. And these public notices will normally show up in the past, you know, for many years now, the public notices have, you know, were supposed to be published in the newspaper. And, you know, this was late 1950s, early 1960s when this provision was put in there. This provision to require public notices was put into the Communications Act as in response to the payola scandals in radio and the quiz show scandals in television in the late 1950s. And that's the whole reason the thought of Congress at that time was that the FCC needed to, you know, that broadcasters needed to be more transparent. So they put in this public notice requirement that eventually resulted in what we currently know as 73.3580 of the rules. This rule requires stations that are filing certain... All right. Okay, we are back. I think we're back. Okay, yeah, we are back. Okay, I apologize for the connection loss there. And what the heck was that just came up on there? Bear with me here for just a moment or two. We'll figure out what's going on. Okay, chat disconnected, successfully reconnected. And so we'll just type in a simple hello from Riverton. And we will continue on. Let's make sure that it posts. Okay, good. All right, so the chat works. Feel free to use the chat. Feel free to use the chat if you want to talk back on this. This is two-way communication. Also, if you have not subscribed to this channel, please do so. Please subscribe to the channel. We would love to have you on board and, hit the notification bell thing to let us, so that way you can keep up to date when new items are posted. So there we go. Anyway, we were getting back to the discussion on the directional antennas and such. The FCC has, again, we're waiting to see what happened. What I asked for in ex parte was, since LP 250 is going to be out the way it should be, the way that it was proposed with the contours, since the contours are out of the LP 250 proposal, and since the translator relief issue is off the table for right now, this leaves LPFM with only 4 reasons to be able to use directional antennas, and that is to limit them to the original public safety application from 2000 that New York State Thruway Authority requested, which actually, honestly, no state government right now is using a directional antenna for a LPFM station for travelers' information. We did that research, and that is kind of a useless rule. Second, adjacent channel waivers. We do have quite a few LPs out there that are using directional antennas on second adjacent waivers. The international agreements, such as the Mexico Strip Zone, that's a new item that we're adding on there. We think we have made some progress on that. And then finally, the waivers for contour protection to channel 6. Those are the only reasons why an LPFM station should be permitted to use a directional antenna. If other contour-based service rules are off the table. Those are the only 4 reasons. And that's what we're asking for. This will... There was a lot of... I think there was a lot of misunderstanding. The NAB definitely brought up some issues with directional antennas. I think they ran with the directional antenna issue, saying that LPFM was asking for carte blanche on directional antennas, which was anything but the truth. I was not. I was asking for limited use of directional antennas for normal LPFM stations that don't have these various issues. A directional antenna won't do you squat. If anything, it'll make things worse. It'll diminish your coverage, not improve it. Because remember, this is not amateur radio. If you are licensed for 100 watts ERP, that output power at the peak lobe of that directional antenna, it must be 100 watts ERP. That's how directional antennas work in broadcasting. It's not like sticking up an 8-element Yagi on 2 meters, running 25 watts from your transmitter, and getting maybe like 7 dB a gain, and really and being able to hit that repeater 80 miles away. That's not how it works in broadcasting. So the idea is if you use a high gain antenna, then that means that you can drop the power of your transmitter. You don't have to run a full like these single bay circular antennas out there that are 3 dB of loss, and they're running 280 watts transmitter power to get 100 watts of ERP. You don't need to do that. On a when there's more gain on the antenna. That's why we're always telling people, if you're going to install, do a two-bay antenna, or do a vertical with gain. Do like a dominator, and that way you're not taxing your transmitter. You're also keeping your electrical costs slightly down. So that's where we're at on that. So we're just waiting for the FCC on that issue. But let's get back to public notice, because that is the other issue right now that we are currently working on right now. Under the Communications Act, the all broadcast stations have been required to make a public notice, and up until now, that public notice for news stations as well as existing ones have normally been through taking out ads in the newspaper. The logic was that the newspaper is the dominant voice, it's the authoritative voice, I guess you could say, of a community. It was the way that you reached the community, by thumbing through the newspaper and reading everything, and then eventually coming up on the public notices that say that so-and-so radio station has filed a license to filed an application to do this. So that's the way it's been for quite a few years. With the changes in the consolidation in the newspaper industry, the consolidation of local papers into regional papers, that has driven up the cost of classified advertising big time, because you no longer have the small town paper. If you put an ad in the paper, it's going to a whole region and not just to a little local area. And that's obviously driving up the prices and such, and the broadcast industry has been aware of this. The FCC's been aware of this. They've been looking at various things. So they decided to change the rules and propose rule changes that would take newspapers out of the equation. Now, of course, now you're saying, what about LPFM stations? Because when you filed your application originally, you did not do public notice in the newspaper. That is correct, because the FCC forgot to put a rule in for LPFM. That's what happened. The FCC has a rule 73.801 that lists all the rules outside of subpart G, outside of the 73.8 something rules that also apply to LPFM. When LPFM was created in 2000, in order to keep it simple, they left quite a few things out. And a couple of them are starting to bite them back. The silent station issue, which we got resolved in MB docket 19193. And now this issue with the public notice. The public notice is a statutory issue that is required by the Communications Act. It was never implemented for LPFM. So for the first window series in 2000, 2001, and for the second window in 2013, LPFM stations were never aware that they had to do the public notice. And the FCC never enforced it. The form did not ask that the station had, that the applicant had certified that they had made that they're going to make the public notice. Make matters worse is the FCC is never does not allow, more or less require or allow, LPFM stations to have a public file. So there's no place to put the certifications into. Normally, don't worry, I have not been outside in I've not been outside the property in quite a few days, and so I've been quarantined, and I have definitely washed my hands many times since then. So if I touch my face, it's safe. Trust me, it's safe. So we have, so that's what's going on. So the LPFMs have never been required to do public notice. When this renewal cycle came along, somebody had posed a question to the audio division and said, are LPFM stations required to do the on-air public notice messages? The on-air messages are part of the public notice process. And at first, they were told no, even to the point of where a message went up on the FCC's website regarding broadcast renewals. It said that public notice did not apply to LPFM stations. Well, that all changed. I eventually got a follow-up email from the division chief in the audio division who said, statute does apply here. And even though there's no rule implementing LPFM stations to do the public notices, we are going to, statute requires it. The Communications Act requires it. And the Communications Act overrides the rules. The rules are supposed to be implemented based on what is in the Communications Act. The Communications Act is the will of Congress. FCC works for Congress. And that's how it works. So now that's why in March we saw that sudden shift where stations are now having to run the pre-file and post-file announcements. What we saw come out this month was actually pretty interesting, was that the FCC had determined that the pre-file announcements were not statutorily required, although that was proposed in what was going on. The pre-file announcements are more of a public interest courtesy, warm and fuzzy kind of thing, I guess you could say. So, but the post-file announcements are statutorily required. This is why Ohio and Michigan was given a pass on their pre-file announcements for the month of April and May, but will still have to do their post-file announcements in June, July, and August, was because of that issue. And also, too, I really think that the FCC saw that this, was acknowledging that this item was going to be coming to the May agenda, and once this is adopted, it may be June, July or so before the rule is published in the Federal Register and implemented. But so so that's what's going to happen is that the FCC is shifting away from newspapers and going to on-air and online for public notices. Now the rules are different for commercial versus non-commercial. The rules are different if your station's already on the air and broadcasting versus a station versus a application for a new construction permit or a silent station. But these are the basic rules here that will happen. This applies to non-commercial stations, and non-commercial in this case means both full service and LPFM. That when a station's when the announcements are required, stations will broadcast 6 announcements over a 4-week period, with at least 1 per week. So there's 2 weeks where you'll have to do 2 announcements. You can't do 2 announcements in 1 day. Announcements can only run, I believe, between 7 a.m. and 11 p.m. Monday through Friday. So no weekend announcements. You can't sneak them in at 11 o'clock on Sunday night when nobody's listening. But yeah, Monday through Friday from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. And this includes the renewals. This will include the renewal announcements. And the nice part about this, though, is, first of all, the pre-file announcements are going away completely under this. There'll be no more need for pre-file announcements once this is adopted and implemented. You only have to do post files. And on post files, you're not going to have to do 1st and 16th of every, for the next 3 months. You get to choose what time of the day you want to run the announcements, as long as you stay within that Monday through Friday 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. parameter. And as long as you air at least one per week, and and a total of 6 overall. And so it's not like before where you had to run like so many announcements between these hours and so many between these hours and so many between these hours. That's all going away. It's simplifying. Now here's the issue, is regarding new applicants and silent stations. They're going to need to post their public notices on a, quote, publicly accessible website. I fought the FCC on this one originally because of what they were defining as local websites. And they were talking about local websites, targeted to the area, local government website, local community bulletin board website, state broadcasters associations. These are the ones that eventually wound up in the rule text. But they were also talking about, local websites operated by newspapers and Chamber of Commerce websites. The problem is that these sites are not necessarily available to a new entrant. I don't know why the commission can't understand that. But the idea of doing this was wrong as far as limiting these limiting these public notices to these types of websites. First of all, in order for a local government to put to put up those notices, first of all, they're going to have to pass an ordinance to allow it. Second of all, their attorneys are going to need to determine whether it is within the whether it's in the jurisdiction of the municipality to put this kind of data on a community on their city website. Also, it puts the city government in a position of whether they should be able to approve or disapprove the establishment of a radio station in the community, which then brings up a huge amount of First Amendment issues. This could be fought. ACLU could fight this one and win. And then, what about faith-based stations? Local church wants to put up a station, and they go to the city. Is the city going to list? Is the city going to list that? Without their lawyer saying, this might be a separation establishment issue. You want to be careful. Local government is a complete failure. The only thing that local government will help is if local government is the one that's putting up the station. Local community bulletin board websites. We did a survey last year to ask if people knew if they had a community bulletin board website in their area. What is a community bulletin board website? Good question. The FCC never really cleared up what they were talking about there. And we showed a 80% response that communities did not have a, quote, community bulletin board website. If I was to go onto the localized version of Craigslist and go into the bulletin boards, they have those message boards there, and there is one just for general purpose. If I was to put a broadcast public notice on, let's say, the Eastern Shore version of Craigslist, would that suffice as public notice? And then we got the state broadcasters associations. Now, I do admit a few of the state broadcasters associations have been very receptive to LPFMs. However, there are some out there, such as New Jersey, who are very hostile towards LPFMs. And that may not be a choice for new applicants. Also, too, will the state broadcasters associations require membership in order to have yourself listed with the public notice? I just don't see it happening, and I don't see an applicant for a new LPFM or new small NCE station committing to a state broadcasters association membership, even though they're not yet a broadcaster. This makes zero sense to me, people. And we will be fighting the information. We'll be fighting this. We will be fighting this. Jose brings up Facebook. The commission specifically put in the rule, in the rule that's going here, and this was in the original proposed rule. Let me read to you the exact the wording of what a publicly accessible website is. An internet website that is accessible to members of the public without registration or payment requirements, or any other requirement that the user provide information or responds to a survey or questionnaire in exchange for being able to access information on the website, and B, that it is locally targeted to the area served and or to be served by the applicant station, i.e. or e.g. local government internet website, local community bulletin board internet website, state broadcasters association internet website. And then the rest talks about international shortwave broadcast stations. We won't get into that. But those are the rules. Oh, God, I got itching today. Those are the rules. And Facebook would not count, because Facebook does require registration and such to get in there. What we asked for was the ability for third-party websites to be established for the purpose of displaying public notices, whether it was a commercial type of site where you pay so much and have yourself listed, or to extend that ability to organizations other than state broadcasters associations, extend it to national organizations like NAB, REC, Prometheus Radio Project, National Religious Broadcasters, NRB, NFCB, National Federation of Community Broadcasters, CBI, College Broadcasters Incorporated, the national organizations. What the FCC is kind of stuck in this case, because this is a piece of just very bad legislation, a very piece of obsolete legislation that the FCC is struggling to comply with, and they are grasping at straws. What we really need is congressional action to repeal this public notice requirement completely and eliminate public notices. Because, see, back in the old days, again, everybody's life revolved around what was in the newspaper. The newspaper was a part of daily life. You wake up, you have breakfast, you read the paper. It doesn't happen anymore in this day and age. When you've got 500 channels of TV, talking heads on CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, and all over the place. You've got social media. You've got Facebook dishing out news to you. We're in different times now. It's not like the old days when it's like, hey, there's a sale at Penny's. You know, hey, there's the oh, did you see Joe down the street died? Ooh, we may have a new radio station coming to town. That's the way life used to be. Leave it to Beaver. You know, things have changed, people. And the big issue is getting rid of the legislation. FCC can't do that. If you're okay, Ted is asking, what has the FCC published and what day has adopted that? If you're talking about the public notices, the FCC has not adopted this yet. This is being circulated right now for the May meeting, for the May Commission meeting that will be scheduled for May 13th. So, if it's like what the FCC has been doing, they have been, because of COVID-19, they've been voting on these issues early and then taking them off the agenda. We saw that happen today. 3 items were taken off the agenda. 3 items were left on. And obviously, if you were monitoring the meeting, the 3 items, especially the 5G item, the 5G rural item, were highly contested, and there was disagreement. And you had the minority. You had Rosen, Warsaw, and Starks who were agreeing in part, dissenting in part. So obviously there was discussion there, and that's the reason why they took that one to the agenda. The previous meeting, the one for March, they voted on all the items before the meeting. They took the whole entire agenda off the meeting. And the meeting was like, hello, anybody have any announcements? Okay, we'll see you in the next meeting. Goodbye. That's what the March meeting was basically like. And so 3 items did get onto the agenda, did stay on the agenda, but LPFM did get moved off. Again, I know I'm kind of stalling here, but I'm hoping that the item gets up here. Let's see. They just posted the orbital debris item, I think. Yeah. The 6 gigahertz item. They've just published a couple of the items that were discussed in the meeting. Okay, they have not yet released that text. We are waiting for that text. Again, this was something that was adopted yesterday, late evening yesterday. This was adopted. Like I said, I got emailed after 7 o'clock last night from staff saying that the item was adopted, and that the LPFM item would be released today. The public notice item that we're talking about is for next month. But I just wanted to let you all know that that LPFMs are going to be doing things that they haven't been required to do before. And this, what we're talking about right now, the specific issue with the websites, really doesn't concern existing stations as much it would concern any stations that would be filing in the 3rd filing window for LPFM, which we are right now estimating either very late 2021, early 2022, sometime after the analog Channel 6 shutdown. The FCC is still dealing with Channel 6. We'll talk about filing windows here in just a moment, but That's what the FCC is dealing with there. For existing stations, the public notices for LPFM and for non-com, if you're on the air, you don't have to do any of this website nonsense. You won't have to do any of this, any of the old newspaper nonsense. You're going to do it over the air. And these are the types of applications that you would do them on, that you would do any kind of public notice on. Original construction permit applications, of course, that would not apply. Major change applications filed during a window. Let's say that you're on the air, and you decide that your station files to move more than 11.3 kilometers as part of a major change. You're doing some kind of a major change activity that would not normally be allowed except during a filing window. Then you have to give public notice on that. Renewal of licenses, we're already doing that. Even though it's not implemented in rules for LPFM, we are already doing on-air public notice for renewals. Full service NCE stations, not LPFM, we'll do them on minor modifications that are changes the community of license. Remember, full service radio has totally different has specific rules regarding community coverage and community of license and all that. So that's going to be an issue for full service stations. Also, assignment applications. This is probably the other big one that LPFM will have to do public notice on. If you are going to be giving your LPFM station or transferring it, whatever, to a different organization, to a different entity, then you will have to do these announcements. You will not have to do these announcements for changes in the board of directors. Anything that you would file a Form 316 for, any changes in board of directors, you won't have to do this. But if you're going from one nonprofit organization to a different nonprofit organization, different organization, different entity, different filing with the state, different mission statement, different everything, yeah, you will have to give public notice of those filings online, on the air. Commercial has an online on their website requirement too, which NCE and LPFM does not have. So that's pretty much where we're at with that. If you want to, here's an example of what the new announcements will sound like. This is a sample for a renewal. Now you probably know how the current announcements are done. First of all, remember, we got rid of the pre-file announcements. Will be gone with this. It's only going to be post-file. And this is basically it. On April 23rd, XYZ Community Radio licensee of WXYZ LP 102.7 Podunk, USA, filed an application with the Federal Communications Commission for license renewal. Members of the public wishing to view this application or obtain information on how to file comments and petitions can visit www.fcc.gov/search-LMS and search in the list of WXYZ LP's filed applications. That right now is the message. I do have a couple of issues. First of all, if for full service stations, the message is worded to direct listeners to the station's online public file. But for LPFM, because LPFM doesn't have a public file, they're directing people to this URL, this fcc.gov/search-LMS. If a listener hears that, they're going to wonder, WTF is LMS? They're going to wonder, what the heck is LMS? And, and was it LMN? Was it LNS, LN, LMN? What was it, Also, if you do go to that URL, if you go to that fcc.gov/search-LMS, it takes you to the main page for LMS. From there, it goes to the main search page for LMS. From there, you still have to go deeper in. You can either search by facility, you can search by applications, you could search by pleadings, ownership reports, and various things. But, they want you to do is they want you to go to the facility. So that way you could see all the, so that way you can pull up the facility, I guess, and bring up the applications. We're going to be talking to the FCC ex parte on that piece of it and saying that if you're going to give us a URL to say on the air for the FCC, first of all, give us something a little easier than search LMS. Give us something that makes a little more sense. Second of all, whatever URL that you give us, make sure that it lands on the page where the user will put in the call letters and not have to go down a second level. For the public file for full service, it takes them right to an entry blank that says, okay, please enter the call letters. But the one that they're giving for LPFM sends them to this generic page where the user is going to be confused as hell, and they're still going to have to dig down. So there, we have a couple. These are very minor issues with the current rules on this. Although the big issue is that I feel that for new entrants, and the idea of broadcast diversity is to bring new entrants into radio, because of the lack of a valid way of making a public notice, the FCC is basically doing everything now to exclude new entrants. And I think it's mainly unintentional. I think it's mainly just because the FCC really had no other options that they were willing to go with, even though we gave them options. And also, too, under the current rules right now, for deep rural areas that don't have a daily newspaper or a weekly newspaper, there were options like for broadcast translators where they could post a paper notice in the post office. We don't have that anymore under these rules. And, the rules assume that everybody's gone digital. And I could tell you not everybody has. We still have a lot of rural America that still lacks decent broadband service. But, these current rules were not well designed. To me, the absolute fallback should be the ability for a station applicant to post a public notice on a board, on a piece of paper, mounted to the wall of the building of where they're located, so that way it's seen from the street. This is no different than if you are a retailer and you're applying for a liquor license. And they put that big note in the window that says that so-and-so has applied for a liquor license, and here's the day of the hearing and all that. Some kind of a note, not larger than life like the liquor notices, but something decently sized that announces that, that's, to me, that's public notice. That's notice in your community. There needs to be that option available, because these website options for new entrants are not going to work. And the newspaper is unreasonable. There's got to be a happy medium somewhere. And that's what we're going to be spending the next 2 weeks working with the commission on, is trying to find that happy medium. Let's check again and see if the FCC has posted anything else yet. Let's see. 13. Nope, they haven't yet. All right. Tell you what we're going to have to do here. I've got no choice on this here right now, but since well, first of all, before we do that, I can burn a little more time here. I don't know if anybody has seen the proposal that was filed. There was a proposal that was filed to allow for FM boosters to be used to originate some like local commercials, local traffic and stuff. This is basically what it's they're calling it zone casting, and this is geo broadcast systems. And the idea was that they wanted to put up be able to do these kinds of local weather and announcements and stuff like that. Just a very small amount of time. And the big thing, of course, is they want to do localized commercials on FM boosters. The problem, though, while the concept of different programming for a booster, at times will help, it sounds good. I mean, it sounds pretty creative. I could see a couple of non-com applications for that. The problem is that the way they're marketing this right now, and the way that they're getting broadcasters, local broadcasters on board, it's like they're literally creating what I'm calling a booster boom. I am afraid that if this does go through, that we're going to see we're going to see full power stations trying to put in boosters where they probably wouldn't have thought about putting in a booster before. Or thinking, okay, maybe the booster can improve our coverage within an area, help, fill in some gaps and such. And guess what? We could run localized ads and we can sell those. The problem is that there's a couple of technical. I mean, the change in the content will not harm LPFM stations because there's no physical changes to the stations. However, if new stations come on board, if new boosters come on board, or existing boosters are modified in some way or another, that could cause some harm to LPFMs and FM translators, especially in cases where a full-service station was authorized at their current location subsequent to the LPFM. We've seen this happen. LPFM station sets up somewhere. All of a sudden, there's this full-service station that's now come into the area. They're spaced. They're short-spaced, but they're not. There's no what we call contour overlap between the interfering contour of the LPFM and the 70 dB contour of the full-service station. So therefore, the interference rule in 73809A is not invoked, meaning that would force the LPFM to go off the air or find somewhere else to go. And the actual operation of the full power FM station is to the point where the LPFM station can live with it. Apparently, maybe the interference is not that big. The LPFM station can live with it. Maybe there's intervening terrain that's keeping the full service station from interfering with the LPFM despite the shorter distance and contour overlap. That could be, that could be what's going on. But here's the thing. If that FM station was to put a booster in, and that booster is in that area where that's within their service contour, but is currently not being covered by the FM station, that booster could create interference with the existing LPFM. But the full service station is doing this to try to fill in more of their service contour, which in normal cases where we don't have this subsequent authorization stuff would probably work fairly well. But now you've got an LPFM station that is fairly close to the service contours of the full service station. And now this booster is suddenly interfering with this LPFM station. Now, you may think, okay, well, it's from a full power station. They have the rights to that area, and therefore, if they put the booster up there, tough beans to the LPFM. Either put up, shut up, or move. But That's not the way it works. Section 5(3) of the Local Community Radio Act states that LPFM stations, FM translators, and FM booster stations are equal in status and must remain secondary. Those are the words. FM boosters are specifically called out. FM boosters are also called out in the 74-1203A and 74-1204F rules. So here's a scenario that could happen. Booster applies for station, the full service station applies for the booster. The LPFM can fight it up front using the same rules that they use if they want to fight a translator. Same rules. And they might, if they're able to show the number of listeners within the LPFM's 45 dB, that would be interfered with, have like the negative 20 DU ratio or UD ratio or what have you. They can make that interference package. They can stop that booster, even though that booster is within the service contour of the full service station. If afterwards the booster goes on the air and the LPFM has interference, the LPFM can still stop the booster as long as the LPFM doesn't modify. Because right now the LPFM is the previously authorized station. They will have precedence over any secondary service, and boosters are secondary. And unlike a translator, a booster could go up to 20% of the full service station's class maximum ERP. So 20% of 100,000 watts for Class C, C1 stations, 20% of 6 kW for Class A stations, and you can work the rest in. And so that's what we're dealing with there. And a couple days ago I did file comments on that rulemaking, and I did show the examples of how this could work, because the petitioner was claiming, this is not going to harm any other broadcast station. And in many cases it won't. But if it starts this boom of new booster stations to start, if this is going to encourage new stations to set up new boosters, this is going to be a problem in some areas. Especially, like I said, where the full service station was subsequently authorized. And this is not just going to hurt LPFMs, but this is also going to hurt translators. And translators will be able to fight these things too. This is an equal battle. LPFM and translators are in the same boat on this one from encroaching boosters, if something like this was to happen. So those are the issues that we raised. And we'll see how that proceeding goes. Let's just do one more look at the FCC to see if they've added any more documents. They have not. All right, kids. Sorry to do this, but I'm going to tell you what I'm going to have to do. I've really got nothing else to really talk about right now, since we don't have the report and order text yet. Can't talk about that. So I'm going to go ahead and end the live stream. And if something comes up, we will talk about it. But as of right now, we do not have the report and order text for LPFM for the LPFM 19193. Ricky, what did I miss? What did I miss? What did I miss? Well, you missed a commission meeting, which I do apologize for the first few minutes of audio being cut off. This whole thing of doing these teleconferencing with the meetings is totally new to us here. So, obviously we had some technical issues there. We talked about public notice for LPFM for all stations, the changes in the public notice rules that will be looked at in the May meeting for the commission. And we talked briefly about the report and order that came out that was adopted yesterday by the commission for MB docket 19193 for the LPFM technical changes. However, the text of the document of that order has yet to be released. I will say this though, based on everything that I have, everything that I know that I think is going to be in there, I will say this, because I got this question this morning: is LP 250 dead? And even if the FCC rejects it in this report and order, which I expect is going to happen, it's not dead. I'm already planning petition for reconsideration on MB docket 19193. And the main thing will be LP 250. I have been asking the LPFM coalition if they wanted to come in on this and file reconsideration on translator relief. That's the contour protections to translators. If they want to do that, they are more than welcome to file that. I did that as a favor to them. I originally did the translator relief mainly as a favor to the LPFM coalition, those who are concerned about that piece of it, those who've been, those who were supportive of Prometheus's 800 plus informal objection, basically blowing every translator that moved out of the sky. That's why that was in there. So that's pretty much it. Jose asks, how many boosters can I have if I had a station? Boosters are only used in a certain circumstance, and that is to fill in a weak signal or no signal in an area that is still within your station's designated 60 dB service contour. And the coverage of the booster must stay within that service contour, within that primary station service contour. It cannot be used to extend service outward. And LPFM currently has a hard limit of 2 because the FCC counts a booster like a translator in the LPFM rules. This is going to be coming out with the 19193 piece that's going to be adopted here. That was already adopted. It should be released out here later today. So, the boosters are not necessarily the catch-all cure for the common cold, the cure for cancer, the cure for COVID-19. That's not the case. The boosters are in for very specific purposes. We see there's stations, for example, in the Salt Lake City market in Utah that are, where the station itself is out in the mountains. But because of the terrain and because of the heights and because of how contours are measured, the contour of the station falls into the Salt Lake City area. However, because of terrain, the full service station signal does not make it into the Salt Lake City area. So the solution is set up boosters in Salt Lake City at various spots and use that to fill in the service contour. We did something similar in Southern California with KWSV LP. Right now, the only LPFM booster that's on the air. We did that same exact thing. They were in a terrain situation. They had, because of the strange terrain between the Simi and San Fernando valleys, they had the ability. They had line of sight to the Simi Valley area, but they had this large lobe going to the San Fernando Valley, but because of terrain, they were completely blocked. So we went to a different mountain and put a directional antenna towards the San Fernando Valley to fill in that area. And that's the very first LPFM booster. That was my baby. That was my design. And very successful booster. Was out there last summer. I was out in California and had a chance to check it out and give it a listen. Drive through the Santa Susana Pass a few times to listen to the transition from the primary to the booster. Interestingly enough, because the primary station is fed from the studio over the internet, and the booster is fed directly from the studio over the internet. When I drove through Santa Susana Pass a couple times, I did not notice any change or shift. There was a little bit of capture effect. One station, one trying to catch the other. That you normally get when you are, when you're in that kind of situation where you're between two FM stations. Kind of had a little bit of that capture effect issue, and then we went back on, and then we went into the other valley, and it just like it never happened. So that is a successful booster case. If you want to look that one up, it's KWSV as in Victor LP. KWSV LP, Simi Valley, California. That, and then there's the FM1, which is the very first LPFM booster. That is, well, actually it was the first one authorized. It was the first one that went on the air. We're still waiting for Malibu to get their 2 on the air. We're still waiting for Yucaipa to get their 1 on the air, and I think we're going to be making some moves on the Laguna one to try to get that one on the air. So, in some of these areas like that, the boosters do help, but they're not for everybody. Puerto Rico is a very challenging area, and it'll be, I know that somebody did try a booster there at one time. But unfortunately, what they had proposed would have extended the service contour and such. And so, yeah, I don't know how well a booster would work in that situation. Now, for a big station, for a big full power station in Puerto Rico, where there's a huge service contour, yeah, there are boosters. If you have a station in San Juan that's got a service contour that goes out to the west, yeah, you may see boosters in the western part of the island for the full service station in San Juan. You may see that. But here we go. Again, I know I'm stalling for time here. I'm doing content stretching in the best Blair Alper fashion here, but unfortunately, we still don't have an RNO document. Let me just check and make sure that for some reason it didn't get filed on the 22nd. All right, let's go through the 22nd again. There's 40 documents here, and Wednesday is usually the day that the wireless folks put out all their public notices for the week. So Wednesday is always, is always flood day here for various things. And no, so far nothing. All right, let's look one more time. Make sure. Nope, still 13 items for today. So, anyway, tell you what we're going to do. We're going to run. And, stay tuned on social media. Stay tuned on the Facebook page for REC Networks for any updates. And if I feel that it's warranted, maybe I'll start another live stream today or whenever this whole thing does happen. So, anyway, thank you all for your patience. Thank you all for watching, the America's Most Boring Michi. Because all I do is dribble about all this techno babble. And, well, it's what we live and breathe doing. And, still right now, I've been fortunate right now that our family has not been directly impacted by COVID-19. Even I have been very cautiously, maybe to the point of paranoia, social distancing and keeping the, keeping our distance away from other folks and quarantining and everything. And, we're fairly well supplied here right now. We're doing good. There's no calls for desperation here right now. So, I mean, we're actually doing fairly well here. The number of deaths on the Eastern Shore is starting to increase. It is getting alarming. And, the problem that we have here is that we have people who feel that it's their constitutional right to not wear a mask, to not social distance, and to not quarantine during this public health crisis. And I've got a huge issue with that, because I feel like when you look at the places where they are starting to kind of slowly reopen things, you look at the churches, for example, that have defied the rules and are allowing congregations in. These are situations where we're starting to see a high number of cases increase. So, yeah, we've got to be careful. We've got to be careful out there. Radio needs to continue to support the CDC guidelines, needs to continue to support the various guidelines to make sure that everybody protects themselves. We need to make sure that you're all doing that. We need to make sure that it's for everybody's safety. We're going to get through this. And, we're already starting to see articles show up how radio is coming through in COVID-19. We need to continue that. And, we need to really show radio at its best for COVID-19. We'll be here if you need any support, need any questions. RECnet.com, LPFM at RECnet.com for questions. Please try to avoid sending me questions through Facebook, because Facebook questions don't go through my normal methods, and it's very hard to follow up on Facebook messages that are either sent to me personally or sent through the REC Networks page. LPFM at RECnet.com is the best way to do it, through regular email. All right, with that, and one final check. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you soon.